Hi, welcome to another discussion on street sociology. Now today is a little different. We are covering the Russia-Ukraine war, but not in terms of the conflict itself. Now that's interesting enough, and there's plenty of places in the world you can find expert analyses. Personally, Institute for the Study of War is very useful, and if you go on YouTube or Twitter or whatever else, there's a million people with flashy titles that will cover that better than me. So that's not what I'm doing today. What I'm actually interested in is the development of changes in power structures in Europe, and not today, but what's going to take place in 10, 15 years, and the effects those are going to have, even globally. And knowing my small viewer base, but talkative, I'm pretty sure that some of you will have opinions on this yourself, and I would very much like to hear them, because this topic is an open book. You know, it's all speculation at this point. But let's get into it. How will the conflict in Europe change global power structures? Basically, to put it simply, the Russians, due to the actions of their government, and I'm not going to get into who's right or wrong because you can do that yourself, but the actions of Russia's government have led to their exclusion from most of the global financial trading system. They can't trade foreign currencies, SWIFT payments have been cut off, their cards only work in Russia itself, not outside of it. It's pretty unprecedented, really. I mean, there's sort of only places we'd see with this level of sanctioning before are places like perhaps Iran or North Korea. So to have a larger power come under that program is a little surprising. And I think there's going to be some consequences to that, to fully excluding Russia from the international community. And they partly relate to China. China also, I believe, has an alternative to the SWIFT payment system, the international banking transfer program, outside of what the West uses. And a very interesting topic in future on this is going to be the relationship between China and Russia as global powers. Now, first of all, China dwarfs Russia militarily, economically, in every capacity apart from how many nukes you have. China is very much in a position of power over Russia. And of course, Russia has come under the wing of China during this due to their exclusion from the West, which first of all changes power structures between China and Russia. It certainly puts China in a more powerful position in that relationship. But it also brings them closer together by necessity in this case due to the actions of the West. And if in the next 10 to 15, 20 years a union were to come about involving China and Russia together economically and perhaps some other countries, that'll be a very interesting thing. I don't mean in terms of a shared currency or anything like that. I just mean a very close cooperation. It's going to be curious to see where that goes. And this cuts both ways, because you see the actions of Russia have also highly concerned European powers, in this case Germany especially. Now Germany is a very interesting one, because since World War II they haven't really, while they've been well, I suppose you could say economically dominant power in Europe, even if definitely not militarily, very much. I mean, Germany's military today is not very strong, but economically they're a powerhouse. And the Germans have been resistant to a strong program of remilitarization, probably due to certain activities in their past about 80 years ago. And until the business with Russia fully invading Ukraine, the Germans weren't interested in the program of remilitarization. They changed their tune pretty damn quick once the bombs started falling. And this is an interesting thing, because as we all saw around the world during the COVID pandemic, when people are afraid, they act very, very differently to how you might imagine they normally would, or how they might imagine they normally would. This has put the wind up the Europeans like nothing has in decades, and the Germans are now genuinely concerned. So they've doubled their defence budget for next year, up to 2% of their gross domestic product. They're putting 47 billion more euros into their military from next year that they weren't going to. They've doubled their budget. So we can take from that they probably are going to undertake something of a campaign of remilitarization to some extent, but definitely some extent. That's an interesting thing. So all of a sudden we've moved the locus of military power in Europe towards Germany. We've moved Russia away from the rest of Europe and towards China. So we've seen this split where Europe, or the leaders of Western Europe, are sort of moving to rearm, you could say. And in the east, China and Russia are moving away from the West and closer to each other again. This is a very interesting development. While I can't say where it's going to go, it really is food for thought. What happens next? Will there be a challenge by Russia and China to the hegemony of the US dollar as backing global currencies? Will there be any number of things? Very interesting. So that's the key here. I mean, there's countries like Libya, for example, who may have challenged the hegemony of the US dollar and paid quite a price for it. What I'm saying is over the next 10, 20 years, the things that are happening today and the divisions and relationships that are being formed around the world due to the aggression of the Russians and the Western response to that is going to change everything. We just don't know it yet. That's the interesting part. Now, I should probably also point out that it would be hypocritical to point out war crimes carried out by Russian troops and not point out war crimes carried out by the Azov battalion in Ukraine. They're not very nice. Or point out the war crimes committed in, say, Iraq, when most Western countries illegally invaded them. I see a lot of points of disagreement being made where people say, oh, well, why are we, saying these things about Russian war crimes, but we ignore American war crimes? Well, we don't. Not all of us do, anyway. Some of us have actually continually been very upset by the actions of Western governments in certain countries they had no business being in. So, while some may be hypocritical and say, oh, Russia's bad, but so's the West, well, yeah, or the West isn't. That's hypocritical, but you can be hypocritical and be right at the same time. So, yeah, the crimes committed by the Russian army are pretty, at times, atrocious, as are some of those by the Azov battalion on the Ukrainian side, and of course, America, Australia, the United Kingdom, so on and so forth in Iraq. But conflict brings fear and fear brings change. So I guess the question, if you get a bit of, give me something back in the comments here, what do you think is going to happen? Are the Chinese and Russians going to form a closer relationship? Or is their mutual distrust of each other going to lead to divisions there? Do we think that the remilitarization to some extent of the German government as the leader of Europe is going to lead to additional conflicts in 10, 20 years? The answer is, as of yet, we don't know, but I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. There's a hell of a lot of misinformation being pumped out by both the West and the East during this, call it the fog of war, as there always is. But this is the first war in the truly digital age. So everyone's going to have different opinions on this stuff. Now, that's going to lead to some division, but it also makes things a very interesting melting pot of opinion. So what do you think is going to happen? It's an open book. I guess we'll find out. Street sociology.